I just know you're going to love the guests that we have on in this episode, so don't go away. Welcome to the interview. I'm Dr. Rick Wadge, and I have one of our special guests, one of our favorite guests at Israel TV Network, and that is Dr. Dinah Dye.
Hi, Rick. How are you?
Or as we know her as Dr. D.
Well, actually, I'm D cubed.
D
Dr.
cubed.
Dinah Dye, yeah.
All right, I like that.
That's my
D-cubed.
ethereal name.
Okay, very cool. You are here in Amarillo, gorgeous Amarillo, with all the
Hot
wonderful
Amarillo.
beaches in the world.
I'm looking for some sand.
We have lots of sand. That's not the problem. It's the water that's the problem.
Yeah.
You are here filming.
Yes, I'm on season 4, hard to believe. So we've just finished up, about 10 programs for season 4. Looking forward to.
When you just said season 4, I'm thinking, has Israel TV Network been around long enough for 4 seasons?
Well, if you consider two times a year as 2
Yeah.
seasons,
Wow.
Yeah.
So this one here is a different series for you.
Yeah, actually, I haven't done anything quite like this before, but I thought I would take on the parables. This is something everyone is familiar with. Everybody knows Yeshua's stories, the prodigal son, the fig tree, the mustard seed, all those sort of things, and look at them from a completely different light. This is going to be totally outside the box, but I think one of the things that we are not very good at is looking back at the cultural context of the time and trying to engage what would the people of the time, how would they have seen this, how would they have heard it? And, we insert our modern mind, our modern opinions, our modern way of doing things. And yes, the stories can have multiple applications. I'm not saying applications that have been made. We just discount because I have this new view. But this is just a different perspective, from my research.
One more puzzle piece
Exactly.
in the big picture.
Yeah.
The mosaic.
Yes. Well, it is a big picture. And sometimes we forget. We get bogged down in the details. And sometimes you just got to stand back and look at the big picture.
You and I have been watching each other's shows for years. We come from pretty much the same mindset that, and this would be one of those,
Right.
that in post-Reformational Protestantism, we have really lost so much of the meaning of the intent of the Word of God.
Yeah, there's no question. If you take some of the idioms, the expressions, the doctrines or whatever, and you look at them just from a modern perspective, modern America, 2000, you really miss, you've really taken it out of its context. And now you're inserting your own opinion, mindset, theology, whatever on earth you want to call it. And you really do miss the meaning of it. We simply have to go back to the period in which the stuff was written. The writers of the Bible had a perspective. They were writing to those people at that time, and they were writing in the literature and the language of the period. So it's our job to try to unpack that. Now, this is no easy thing. It's not like, okay, I'm going to pick up my Bible. Oh, yeah, I get it. This is sort of an ancient Near East thought. But what I've said is we have the advantage of multiple scholars who have done yeoman's work, having the cuneiform writings out of about 150 years ago to show us on clay tablets what was taking place in ancient Mesopotamia, etc., is invaluable.
Right.
We can't dismiss that. Now, the scholars have a problem trying to communicate to the folks. They don't necessarily write in a language that makes sense to the lay person sitting in the pew or whatever. And so that's where I feel that my skill comes, is to be able to be a bridge and to help take the material, sort of make it palatable and present it in a way that makes more sense and is easier to engage.
What do you say to the person that goes along with Martin Luther and saying sola scriptura?
This is, the problem with that is that we end up taking everything literally. And the writers, see, they wrote history. They have historical, events that they write about, but their approach was their interpretation of those historical events. So anytime interpretation enters into this conversation, we're moving far from sola scriptura. You
We
know what
are.
I'm saying? So,
Right.
and this is a question I get asked often, because people will say, well, how do we know if the Bible, is it being metaphorical or is it being literal? And I say yes, because the author has taken an event, an historical event with real people, in a geographical location, but the author has chosen to write it in a way that expresses their interpretation of those historical facts. And that's,
I agree.
yeah.
Okay, so let's project out 2,000 years from now, from the time we're filming this.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay,
I hope I'm
2,000
not
years.
here.
2,000 years from now, assuming that there's 2,000 years
Yeah, right.
in this time frame, and we make the statement, "Where's the beef?"
What?
Right? "Where's the beef?" was one of those cute little commercials
Yeah.
back in probably the 70s.
Yeah, I think the 70s.
And it was promoting a certain hamburger place that actually had more meat on their hamburgers than the other guys. But the point is, 2,000 years from now, they would be scratching their heads saying, was there a beef shortage? Were there no cows during this time period? Whatever.
Well, no, I mean, I think.
We have the same issue with
Yeah,
Scripture.
Yeah, we ask those questions, but we have to ask those questions because Scripture is filled with gaps. The writers saw no reason to write out every single thing, every angle and dangle of whatever they were looking at. Granted, people would have understood at the time there were things they didn't need to say, but they weren't there to fill in every little missing piece of the story. They were there to give their interpretation of the story. And I don't honestly think that that's really going to change. I mean, we're still going to have to go back to the ancient Near East world, the Middle East. We need to think like they thought. We need to approach the scriptures in the way they did. Now, that does not discount us taking what we learn and understanding and making an application for today in our lives, in our walk. We can't, I'm not saying we don't do that. I think we have to, because we do live in a different time. But I think you can always make the application, but that needs to be built on events on the ground.
If you were to pinpoint one of the main short-sighted things that are taking place today in the pulpits, what might that be?
Oh, my goodness. I'm not sure where to
I
start.
know there's a list, but we're not going to go on to the doors of,
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we're not doing that. There's theology, which we have taken to mean something that it doesn't actually mean, but it's the jump from events on the ground in the ancient Near East to a spiritual application without making the connection in between. I guess an example I could think of is the concept of salvation. So, we in the pulpit, if you're not saved, you're going to hell. Well, there is no context to
And to
that.
alleviate that problem, we say some words and we come down front and we kneel at the altar.
And now we're saved. Well, if you go out with that to a millennial who has not a clue what you're talking about. So we have language and culture of the church. The church has been basically marginalized in the culture, but now when we bring that language out to the marketplace, nobody knows what you're talking about. So this is even more of a reason to go back to the ancient Near East world and say, okay, what did it mean back then? So in sort of the broadest terms, when a king was ruling over a city, let's say he just defeated an empire, you could argue like Babylon defeated Assyria or whatever. King comes to town, probably has to rebuild the temple, the palace, whatever. He wants it in his own image. He doesn't want it the previous king. And he sets up shop and he's got his throne and he's ruling from that place. And his responsibility is to bring order to his empire, is to make things at rest, be peaceful, so people can conduct business and go about their daily lives. So his job then, with his military and his officials and whatever, is to read the tea leaves and protect the nation, right? And of course, they lived in walled cities and they lived up on hills, so they could see, foreign marauders coming and they could protect the empire. So when the king did that, basically he was bringing salvation to his people. He was protecting his people. He was saving them from from a foreign enemy. That is the meaning of salvation in its most basic term. So we fast forward. This is the message of Yeshua, the Messiah, the King. He is to set up shop, to set up his throne, to rule and reign and bring peace and stability to the earth and protect those, his covenant people, from being destroyed by a foreign enemy. So that's far removed from somebody standing in the pulpit and saying, you got to be saved. Well, yeah, saved from what? And we would say, well, the greatest enemy is death. That is our greatest enemy, and that is true. But in the terms of the ancient world, the enemy from outside would come in and destroy the city, kill everybody once they got in, breach the wall. Once they got in, they kill everybody, take people captive, take all the loot, etc. That was the true meaning of salvation. But that's what Yeshua provides for us. He protects us and he saves us and he delivers us from an enemy. And that because of the covenant that we have made with him.
Okay, excluding Paul, is the Bible theological?
I say no. I don't think there's, and obviously theologians will probably want to shoot me, but honestly, the Bible is not religious. In fact, you could argue it's a pretty political book because we are dealing with empires coming and going. But over and above, the Bible is about a kingdom. So in the ancient world, they viewed the cosmos, all the ancient cultures did, viewed the cosmos as a kingdom. And that's where it all begins. This is a kingdom. It is not a religion. And so, 2,000 years from the first century, everything's about religion. We cast religion into its little corner, wrap it up nicely, and you're not allowed out of your box. You're not allowed in the marketplace to say anything. But if you understand you're a member, a citizen of a kingdom, and you have an obligation to go out into the marketplace and, bring people into your kingdom and rescue people from another kingdom, that kind of changes it. And there's responsibilities and rules that govern your kingdom as a citizen. Like people in the United States should kind of start getting that because in the practical sense, we've allowed foreigners just to come in and run roughshod over us who are not citizens of our country. And look what it causes. So this is really the nature of the Bible. It is talking to us about a kingdom, not a religion.
So if a person was looking for a congregation to be a part of, what would the characteristics be of the person who was presenting the biblical message? What would they look for?
Well,
How
they
would they
would
know
have
when they found it?
Well, some of us are still looking. You would want somebody who is kingdom-minded, who the call is going back to the garden, to Adam, which I maintain he is the first king over the kingdom. The earth was the kingdom, and God chose this. Now, Adam, of course, can represent mankind. I'm not discounting that. But he was the first king. He was called to guard and work the garden in the context of being a king. His responsibility was to oversee everything and have rulership and dominion. I mean, the Bible is pretty clear.
Sure.
But his responsibility was also to expand the kingdom to the four corners of the earth. So to me, someone in the pulpit who is calling for the expansion of the kingdom, to go out, to push back against the culture and to stand for what is right and for what is just, that would be somebody I would be interested in listening to. It's not about being inside these four walls and being insulated from the world. That has proven to be a disaster. And I think that's the reason we find America in the shape we're in. We've just kind of hidden in our four walls. We have to be advocates that go out and push and expand, the kingdom. And we do that by love. We do that by humbling ourselves. We do that by serving others. The kingdom works exactly the opposite as the kingdoms of this world, who advance by conquering, destroying, and killing people. Our kingdom operates differently, but we should be in the process of scattering seed and watching it grow and seeing it spread to the four corners. That would be somebody that I would listen to.
Dinah, you're Jewish. Not that I'm teaching you something new about yourself,
I
but
did not know that.
there you go. You're Jewish. So if a person was in the pulpit teaching a Sunday school class, whatever class they were teaching during the week, whatever, small groups, whatever that context is, and they begin to get it, they begin to understand that Jewish people is really the center of this message of what God is doing, and then through that nation, he's reaching the Gentiles, he's reaching the world with the message which begins with the Torah, the instructions of God. Are they going to have backlash from the people? And what would the fears of the people be in that process? How readily accepted would the message be to a denomination if the person was a part of that?
Well, you usually find it's not the leader that gets it, but the people. They usually get it first. And then they kind of push the leader along. And the leader is either open to what the folks are starting, because the folks are out in the culture and sometimes the leader's very insulated and not really exposed to a lot. The people tend to be more
Busy.
so. Yeah.
He's busy.
Yeah,
He's
it's
got
a lot-
ministry to do.
Yeah, I
She's
mean,
got ministry.
a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
And, if you're running a good sized church, you're doing that.
One-stop shop.
Yeah,
You
so
got to provide
sometimes
everything.
just out of, just doesn't have the time. The folks are in all these different spheres of influence. And, some have more time than others, but they tend to be exposed to these things a little more than the leader does. So when it comes in, not always, but normally when a different way of viewing things begins to come in, it's either gets squelched because the leader can't handle it. And all these people are starting to ask questions. And, in some quarters, you can't ask questions, or if you start asking questions, you're being
Disrespectful.
Yeah, you're usurping authority. Whatever.
Causing division.
Yeah, and there's then no place. And people sometimes leaders certainly don't want those questions asked in public, because then it might show that they don't know something.
Everything.
I mean, it's kind
There's a lot of pressure
it's a lot of pressure.
to know everything,
You can't.
have all the
Yeah,
answers.
you can't possibly know everything, and you weren't meant to know everything. This is a living, breathing kingdom of living stones, and God has given all the different dimensions to all of his members of his covenant, so that you can't possibly. And this is a real problem, I think, with the American church, is that we stick a guy in there or a gal behind, and they are expected to do everything.
Right.
The fivefold ministry is not functioning as it should, and they're expected to know everything, and it is impossible. So for someone like me, when I've been in a congregation, it's been very difficult. I have spent my life studying, writing, and trying to present the Bible, from the ancient Near East perspective, from the Hebraic context. But I am always a threat when I enter into, and it's very difficult for me to be there. I mean, they're just rather not be there. And so then the folks might start to question things, and they don't get good answers, and then they get frustrated. There are a lot of questions, and nobody has all the answers. So I would say it's usually the case is it works that way more so than the leader. It's very difficult for the leader if he starts or she starts to understand the background and begins to investigate, because then they go, now what do I do? Like, I'm not really fitting in with my denomination, for example. I'm moving outside the box. This is problematic. I might lose my flock. There goes my income.
Lose my job.
There's
Right.
a lot of factors there, really, on both sides. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what happens.
I think that's the time frame we're in. This is the dilemma of when somebody comes to the truth and sees it from a different perspective from what the congregation hired them and thought that they knew. So it limits the person from being able to grow. If you grow outside of what you knew when they hired you, then do they still want you?
Well, think about your own walk. I mean, I am not anywhere, I've been on this journey, 40 years just about, and there is no way I think the same way I did even 5 years ago.
You
I don't.
started at 5 years old. When you started.
I wish that were true. But I don't even look at the scriptures the same way I did 5 years ago. So if there's no opportunity to, I don't like to use the word evolve, but to grow because you should be building on a foundation, and it should be building up a house. You shouldn't be still at foundational
Yes.
level, and it just is difficult. No one should be in the same place they were. And I think the denominational thing sort of lends itself to kind of staying stuck. It doesn't have to, but it often does.
Fear.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of fear.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of finances to keep a ship moving,
Yeah.
to keep it going,
Well, I'm
to
not
keep newsletters
sure.
going out, to keep,
Yeah.
and then we find ourselves as the tail wagging the dog.
The design was not for one person to make a bunch of money off of all the sheep, and this is their quote vocation. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that was ever the intention. I mean, in a sense, all our vocations is to work and serve in the field, in the garden, and expand the kingdom. Obviously, when a number of people come together, I mean, shepherding, I would venture to say, is the hardest job in America. Thank
getting
you,
harder.
Lord, for not calling me
And
to
getting
that.
harder.
It's very difficult. Many churches have had to close their doors. It's getting harder and harder. And then it was once the bulwark against the culture, and now the culture has infiltrated the church in so many areas. It's just plain difficult. So we see the rise of small groups and homes. It takes the financial pressure off. And then, of course, we see the mega churches, hauling in weekly. But I try sometimes
Lights, camera, action.
A lot of it's just pablum, It's like going in there and it's rah, 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 sis, boom, ba, and then, out into but the people are not equipped anymore to face this culture. This culture will take you out in a heartbeat if you are not, prepared to deal with it.
Does the church in America, what a generic term, the church in America,
Yeah.
does it reflect the church, the congregation described in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament? And then the second part of that would be, what about a church that says, because I mentioned this to you off camera, says we're a New Testament church?
Well, I don't think we look anything like the first century congregation. Of course, it was Jewish, essentially. So that lends itself to problems. Let me step back for a moment and say, the concept of kingship is very important. It's one we really don't understand very well. But in the ancient world, whenever a king came to town, again, seated on throne, built the palace, he needed something to govern his kingdom. You don't just go in there blind. So in the ancient world, they would pass down to the king, and this is true ancient Mesopotamia, we see this, something called the testimonies. In Hebrew, it's the edut. And the testimonies were what was given to the king by his God in order to govern. So in the sphere of Israel, God gave to Moses the edut, directly from him, the word of God, which is, we translate, the Torah. He gave to Moses, who was a king over Israel at the time, the edut, the testimonies to be able to govern the people, because now they're a new nation. They've come out of Egypt, birthed through the sea, the Yam Suf, and they're at the mountain, and they are a nation. They are one standing before God. Well, he's got to be able to govern them. And so the laws that come down, we call the Torah, and that is how the people are governed. And that is they are perfectly just and perfectly righteous. So the problem, of course, in the first century, those principles and laws would have still governed the congregations. That's how they operated. But over time, as we have this idea that we are no longer under the law, which I think is the most ridiculous statement. That's like telling a king in the ancient world, throw out those laws that your God gave you, you're on your own, and you have got to have structure in order to govern. And so the Torah, it's at the very least, does that mean we just, we throw out the Ten Commandments? Like, you can't govern a society, a culture, or whatever without the commandments of God. So the Torah became that bulwark in order for the nation to be governed. And we have, the quote thinking now is that we are no longer under law, so let's just throw it all out and have a free for all, which we have. It's
And it
not
makes
working.
absolutely no sense.
No.
It doesn't.
No,
You have a new book,
I do. It came out in March.
The Temple Revealed in the Garden, Priests and Kings.
Yes,
They're going to want to pick this up. Now,
absolutely.
what was your first book, real quick, and then let's go into this. And what is this about?
This is the second in a trilogy. So the first book was The Temple Revealed in Creation. Because my premise is the greater temple in all of this is what I mentioned earlier. We have the kingdom, but we have the cosmic temple. And God is the ruler over, and he rules and reigns from the cosmic house. Every temple in the ancient world had three parts to it. So the cosmic temple was heaven, earth, and sea. So that begins with the creation and the creation story of molding and shaping and building a house, the cosmic house. But as we move into Genesis chapter 2, now we have a garden. So now it's the temple revealed in the garden, priests and kings. The third volume, which I'm working on now, is the temple revealed in Noah's Ark, because Noah's Ark is a pattern of the temple. And that will take us, the trilogy will take us through Genesis, from Genesis 1 through Genesis 11.
I love your writing. I love the way you teach because it is outside of the box. It's different. It's a different perspective. It's stepping back from the shoulders that we typically climb on top of and we teach from. And I so respect and appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
How can they pick this book up? And your
Well,
first
it's
book
about
as
as simple as
How
it
do they
gets. Just go to Amazon. Amazon.com. All the books are there. They're paperback, Kindle. The first book's now out in audio. I'll be getting to the audio format for this volume probably in a few months.
Okay.
But yeah, it's all there. So it's easy to get.
And I think your fourth season that you've just filmed will be produced and begin airing on Israel TV Network in late September. So we're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and so so the new series is called Parables from Exile to Return, which I know people are not, but it's really based on my research in this particular book, because a lot of the parables are dealing with agriculture and gardens and kings. Like, those are the predominant themes of the parables, and that is all in my book. So I kind of jumped off there, and I'm presenting the parables in a whole new light, in a way I'm pretty sure no one else has done. I'm pretty sure.
Dinah, the time always goes by so fast whenever we get to talking. And I so appreciate you coming to Israel TV Network, filming a fourth season. I can't believe we're already down the road that far.
It's great. No, I appreciate your having me on. It's a blessing. And it's a blessing to have a platform in which to share, because it's sometimes you don't get invited in churches. Needless to say, what I said today is not going to have me invited to too many churches. But it's an people don't have a filter to prevent them from watching the material and hearing things presented a different way.
The blessing is all ours, and
Thank
we
you.
love having you on.
Right.
And thank you so much for supporting and participating in Israel TV Network. We love you. We appreciate you. We couldn't do this without you. We're reaching the world, but we're doing it all together. You're a part of that team. We'll see you next time. Shalom, shalom.